Good morning, everybody. This is Dr. Sonia McGowan with Covenant Pediatric Wellness Center, and I'm so happy you're with me this morning. We are going to be talking about oxidative stress in complex kids. So, it doesn't sound like a very sexy topic, but it's super important for you to understand the implications of this if you've got a kid who has autism, pandas, or really any kind of complex situation. So whether you're talking about, a behavior problem, a mood problem, constipation, selective eating, any of that really falls under this umbrella, and it's important for you to understand. So I'm going to break it down for you. So let's talk first about my clinic. So I practice in Jefferson City, Missouri. We have lots of ways to help kids and families. So really my passion is kids who are complex. It started out, I worked with kids with autism only early in my career. And, as the world has evolved, it's really sort of expanded into what I call complex kids. So not just kids with autism anymore, but kids with, problems sleeping, kids with learning disabilities, kids who don't poop very well, kids who are selective eaters. They have pandas. They have, ADD, ADHD. If the child is struggling in any way, we are happy to help them. So we practice along the biomedical approach, specifically the MAPS approach, the Medical Academy of Pediatric Special Needs. And so that really looks like what we call precision nutrition or functional nutrition. We do neurodevelopmental exams. We do neurologically focused chiropractic because, we have to get to the root cause. And that's our whole goal, is get to the root cause, correct it, not just put a Band-Aid on it. We also have a pediatrician on staff. Dr. Hannah Strong is developing more experience every day with complex kids, particularly autism, pandas. But at her core, she is a standard general pediatrician. What makes us different, though, is, of course, we are a cash practice, so we don't really experience the limitations that insurance will put on the care that she's able to provide. And we are also, we very much support parents and their choices around the medical interventions that are required for their children. So we are a friendly clinic to families. We also do a lot of work around evaluating and intervening for oral restrictions. So tongue ties, lip ties, cheek ties, and all of sort of the implications around that. And then we also have, there are 3 chiropractors on staff, including myself. And we do prenatal and pediatric chiropractic, soft tissue therapy, things like that. So, and that's for all ages. So now that I've added extra doctors, they are seeing adults as well. So while we used to be a pediatrics clinic only, we do see adults for chiropractic and functional nutrition as well. All right. So I have worked with kids with autism forever. And I really consider my son, he never had a diagnosis of autism, but he had a lot of challenges and a lot of behaviors that looked very similar to that. And so that's really my focus on designing this clinic, because I tell you, we were told some pretty ridiculous things when I was looking for help for him. He was nonverbal. He was self-injurious. He had a lot of blood sugar dysregulation, a lot of behavioral challenges. And, parents are all the time blamed for their kids' challenges, but it was ridiculous. I was told, he had terrible eczema. He had horrible constipation and diarrhea that would go back and forth. And we were told just so much nonsense about, he's not talking because he has an older sister, or because I was a helicopter mom, or, it's ridiculous. And I literally went all over the state trying to find someone to help us. And so, anyway, that's a big reason why I started this practice and why we approach families and kids the way that we do, because we lived through a lot of nonsense in the early to mid 2000s. So anyway, I live in Jeff City. This is my husband, Shannon. He is a CPA, but he's newly retired. So not only do we have a newly empty nest, we He's retired as well. So this is our daughter, Libby. She lives in Kansas City. She's a music director for School of Rock. Incredibly gifted musician. She plays multiple instruments fluently, and she's amazing. And then this is Rowan, our son, who had such struggles when he was little. I always like to include this photo because here he was maybe 3, and parents of complex kids recognize this posture, right? He was forever covering his ears. We were trying to get a haircut here, which was nearly impossible because his sensory system just could not tolerate a haircut. So I watched YouTube and learned how to cut hair and cut my poor kid's hair on the deck because he just couldn't stand going to a salon. He probably looked like a hobo for the first couple of years of his life, but eventually we got it done. And so this picture is him moving into his dorm on his first year of college. He's getting ready to start his 3rd year of college in Illinois as a theater costume design major. He's on the dean's list. He has no limitations, needs no accommodations. So I really consider him my first recovery story. Of course, this is the 3 of us on a trip somewhere, and this is our sheepadoodle Ozzy. So he keeps us pretty busy. So let's talk about oxidative stress. So why do we care about it, and why do we care about it now? I'm sure you've noticed that there are so many more kids with challenges now than there have ever been. So we see these rising conditions, neuroimmunity, we see, neurodevelopmental challenges, and parents don't want to Band-Aid the situation. They want and they need root cause answers. They want to know the why behind their child's challenges. And so oxidative stress is central to so many symptoms, and that's why it's important for us to understand it. So today we're going to talk about what oxidative stress is, why it's important for complex kids, how we know that this is a thing for kids, what we do about it at our clinic. So when we talk about oxidative stress, we have to talk about the imbalance between free radicals and antioxidants. So antioxidants, and we'll talk more about this, but there are certain nutrients. They come from food, they can come from supplements, and these balance what we call free radicals. And so free radicals are basically molecules with unpaired electrons. And because they are highly reactive, because they only have one electron, they will cause damage to tissues and cells. So this creates a situation like rust in the body. So when I'm explaining this to parents, when I'm going over their child's test results, I liken it to, rust on your bumper. Or if you peel a potato and you leave it, or an apple, it turns brown, right? So that's oxidation, and that creates cell and tissue damage. So when we talk about free radicals, there are lots of sources. So the sources can be toxins. So think about things like plastics, think about pollution, think about pesticides and herbicides, think about dyes, artificial dyes in our food. It can also be things like infections. So, think strep, staph, ear infections. It can be any number of either bacterial or viral infections. Poor diet can be an issue. And as you know, most of our kids, our complex kids, tend to be pretty selective eaters. So sometimes it's a true diet issue that, kid's just not a great eater. Sometimes it's an issue of they're well fed, they're good eaters, but they lack sort of the metabolic strength to adequately digest and uptake their nutrients. Stress can also really increase free radicals as well. And so when we talk about free radicals or oxidation, right, things that cause oxidation, it's balanced by antioxidants. And so those are generally, on the testing that I do, we look at vitamins A, C, D, and E. We look at glutathione and CoQ10. Those are sort of the big players in the antioxidant world. So when your free radicals are balanced by antioxidants, then your cells are protected from that damage. And so complex kids are at a higher risk for oxidative stress for a lot of reasons. It can be genetic variants. So I'm sure most of you have heard of, for example, MTHFR. That is a particular genetic difference that a great many of us have. It can affect things like your ability to detoxify, your ability to express your DNA appropriately. People with that variant can have what we call, I don't love the term, but it's what it is, midline defects. So things like scoliosis or tongue ties, or sometimes you'll even see like the sugar bug vein. You'll see stork bites on the back of the neck, things like that. But there are many, many genetic variants that can predispose a child to oxidative stress. The other thing about complex kids is almost across the board, they have mitochondrial challenges. So back up. The whole point of eating is to transform that food into energy inside the cell. So that energy currency is called ATP. So the whole point, make ATP, right? So that we can make glucose and our body can be happy. And most kids with complex needs have very inefficient mitochondrial function. So they're not able to turn the food that they eat into ATP very effectively. And this is one of the first things that I look at on labs for kids who are complex. Because if you aren't making good cellular energy, you can't expect higher level things to be efficient. So you can't expect things like your immune system or your digestion or your detox pathways to be efficient when you have mitochondrial issues. I have done webinars on this in the past, so go to my webpage, thewhymatters.net, and scroll down and you'll find a deep dive on mitochondrial issues if you're interested. Chronic infections and inflammation kind of go together with the fourth point, that affinity for toxins and infections. So our kids really are magnets for things like chronic infections, inflammation, infections, toxins. It's unbelievable some of the test results we see in very small kids who have complex needs. And it takes a lot of skill to sort of tease out what the priorities are there, because many kids just have a long list of pretty significant findings. So the chronic infections, inflammation, and toxins really put kids at a higher risk for oxidative stress. So what, again, can trigger oxidative stress? So definitely nutrient deficiencies. This is a big one. We see kids every day who we just marvel at how low their nutrient levels are. And again, with the mitochondrial dysfunction, very, very common. If I see a kid who has robust mitochondrial function, I'm surprised. And I'm ringing the other doctors in the practice saying, you won't believe I finally found a kid who has good mitochondrial function. They also have a lot of chronic infections, strep, Epstein-Barr, mycoplasma, you name it. We find lots of chronic infections in these kids. And they are very susceptible to metabolic triggers, specifically things like sedation. So anytime a child undergoes some sort of sedated procedure, whether it's a dental procedure or a surgery or something like that, we work really hard with parents to prepare that child's body, because we have just seen so many kids who regress after sedation. And then the last common trigger that we'll talk about would be toxins. So things like pesticides, herbicides, chemicals, plastics, mold in the environment. Our kids are super susceptible to that. So when a child has high oxidative stress, it impacts their brain. Okay. So it disrupts their dopamine pathways. It will incite a lot of anxiety, a lot of behavioral meltdowns, sensory overload. It disrupts their sleep patterns, and it really sort of keeps them stuck in fight or flight. And this is why chiropractic is such an important part of our kids' intervention plans, because the easiest way to help a child transition from fight or flight into rest and digest is with a skilled pediatric chiropractic adjustment. So that's why we offer a wide variety of services for our kids. So let's talk about the immune system. We talked about the brain. Let's talk about the immune system and autoimmunity. So cytokines are a signaling molecule that are important in the management of the immune system, the immune response, inflammation, inflammatory response. So when there is high oxidative stress, it can cause a cytokine surge. And so this creates an exaggerated response to infections, toxins, stress, right? And so these cytokines will cross the blood-brain barrier. This will disrupt a child's mood, their behavior, their cognition. So how many kids do we have who come to us when they have the verbal skills to say so, that they'll say things like, I have brain fog, I can't focus, I don't know what I'm supposed to be paying attention to. And one of our major complaints from families is that these kids don't sleep, right? And so this is just a way that helps you see that oxidative stress in complex kids can have a wide-ranging effect. We will also see lots of increased self-stimulatory behavior. We'll see loss of language. We see in kids who have PANS or PANDAS, we will see more intense or frequent flares as well. And so because these cytokines pass through the blood-brain barrier, it compromises that blood-brain barrier. And what would have been a temporary immune response can become this prolonged neurological storm. And then this will lead often to autoantibody production, which triggers autoimmunity. How does it affect the gut? So oxidative stress can incite gut dysbiosis. So dysbiosis is an overgrowth of things that shouldn't be there, yeast, bacteria in particular. And so when a child has a yeast or a bacterial overgrowth, it causes what we call leaky gut or intestinal permeability. This then leads to what we call a leaky brain, right? That blood-brain barrier is not intact. Those cell membranes aren't as intact as they should be. And then this drives inflammation, and then it just goes in a vicious cycle. So oxidative stress definitely impacts our intestinal health. How does it affect behavior and energy? Well, remember, mitochondria dysfunction is a big deal in this picture. And because they're not great at turning their food into energy, we will often see things like fatigue. We'll see sort of kids who will just crash out, low stamina. We'll see mood swings. We'll even see issues around motor planning problems. And if you've been around me at all, you know that I stand on a hill and preach about low cholesterol in complex kids. It is exceedingly common in complex kids for them to have low cholesterol. Now, in our society, we are told that the lower your cholesterol, the better. And this is absolute 100% nonsense, especially for kids. Cholesterol is essential for lots of things, and it needs to be at a certain level so that our kids and adults have good hormone levels, so that they have myelin, that they have good brain development. And kids who have low cholesterol are known to have behavioral issues, fatigue, mood problems, developmental delays. And so it is so common in complex kids for them to have low cholesterol that I test pretty much every kid who comes in the door for functional nutrition, because it is a huge component to whether these kids are going to get better. So how do we know if a child has oxidative stress? So there are a couple things we look at. We rely very heavily on labs here in this clinic. We like to test, we don't guess, right? So every intervention that we recommend for kids is based on an exam finding, a history finding, and or lab results. So glutathione is one of the levels that we are able to look at via a urine test that we do. Glutathione is your master antioxidant, and kids who are complex are notoriously low in glutathione. We also look at other antioxidant levels. So remember, that's vitamin A, vitamin C, vitamin D, and E. We also look at a particular oxidative stress marker called 8-OHDG, and I'm going to show you what that looks like on a lab. But it's a very particular, this and the lipid peroxides are very particular measures of oxidative stress. And then there are certain organic acid markers that we look at too, and I'll show you that as an example. All right, so this is the urine test that I mentioned. It's called the metabolomics from Genova Diagnostics. I do this test very, very, very frequently. We have a hard time keeping the test kits on the shelf because, we just see so many kids. And so this is part of page 1 of that metabolomics. It's a urine test, first morning urine that the parents gather and they freeze and they ship it off to the lab. And then I get results in 2 weeks. I also did a deep dive on this test. You'll find it on the same website, thewhymatters.net. If you'll scroll on down and look for the test series, you'll be able to do a deep dive on this. But on the first page, we have these different summaries, basically. So these are the main pillars that this test looks at. And you can see right here, this is giving us information specific to oxidative stress. These are the analytes that the test looks at and then puts those all together to give a summary on how severe is this child's oxidative stress. 10 is the maximum. It's the most severe. So you can see that this little gal has very high oxidative stress, okay? It also looks at mitochondrial function. It looks at omega-3, 6, 7, and 9 levels. It tells us about toxic exposure and detox pathways. And then it also looks at methylation. So remember, I talked about the genetic differences, the MTHFR in particular. MTHFR it governs methylation. And so methylation is driven by B9 and B12. And this test assesses that. So it gives us kind of a look at any kind of methylation issues. So the second page of this test is all about nutrient deficiency. So it tells us about antioxidant levels, B vitamins, minerals, and then fatty acids. And so this is the same child from the previous slide. So you can see that all of her antioxidants are extremely low. She's very, very deficient in antioxidants. So the minute I see this, I'm already thinking oxidative stress is going to be through the roof, most likely. This section of the test tells us about dopamine and serotonin. So remember, early on in the presentation, I talked about how oxidative stress will disrupt dopamine pathways. And that's what we see here. So this child, we're looking at dopamine and epinephrine here. And so you can see she's urinating away what she ought to be using to make dopamine. Same with serotonin, right? Remember, much of your serotonin is made in your intestine. And like we've talked about, oxidative stress creates that cycle of gut dysbiosis and inflammation, leaky gut, leaky brain, etc. This part of the test is telling us about toxin and detox markers. So again, we can see this same child really struggles with her detox pathways. And, she has a high level of certain types of toxins. So styrene is one of them, styrofoam and plastic. And then MTBE is a petroleum derivative that's very frequently found in our water. So for her, I guarantee it is not that she's swimming in this cesspool of toxins, right? It's a normal exposure, but because her body is stressed, she has a lot of oxidative stress, she has a lot of nutrient deficiencies, she has very severe mitochondrial dysfunction. What we're seeing is poor detox. It's a higher level function that cannot be efficient when those lower, more foundational issues are not addressed. And then here, this is the oxidative stress markers section. So we can see, remember I talked about lipid peroxides and 8-OHDG being markers for oxidative stress. And looky here, exactly what you would expect, right? So page 2 of this test is telling us about antioxidants. They were super low. So in my mind, I'm already thinking oxidative stress is going to be high, and it is. All right, so how do we intervene on this? Diet is super important. Food can be medicine or food can be poison. And so you really have to think about what you feed your kids. They cannot be healthy on things like Mountain Dew and Cheetos, okay? Do your best. And I know kids are selective, right? I raised 2 of my own kids. One was extremely selective for a very long time. So I get it. But kids need whole foods, right? They need as little sugar as possible. They need lots of fats. They need lots of proteins and as few additives and dyes as possible. So diet is super important. It's also important for complex kids for us to understand if food allergies and sensitivities are a part of this. So many kids are either allergic or sensitive to some of the big food groups like gluten, dairy, eggs. And so knowing what triggers your child is important in terms of food. We do food allergy and sensitivity testing here. It requires a blood draw, but it's very comprehensive and it gives allergy, sensitivity, and inflammation information on nearly 100 foods. So if you're suspicious of food allergies, we can definitely help with that. So we have to look at nutrient levels. We have to assess that, right? We test, we don't guess, so that we know exactly where the child stands with any sort of nutrient or vitamin deficiency that they might have. And then we have to assess mitochondrial function. If we don't do this first, we're just treading water. We have to get a child's mitochondrial function on track right out of the gate if we expect their immune system, their digestion, their cognition to come along. We also have to think about detoxification. So these are kids who notoriously aren't good at detoxifying. Many of them do not sweat appropriately. It's one of the questions I always ask in my histories. And most parents kind of look at me like, why does that matter? But it really does matter, because if a child isn't sweating like they should, they're not detoxing like they should. And so we often recommend things like the Ion Cleanse foot bath. We recommend hyperbaric oxygen therapy. Both of those are available here. For some kids who can't tolerate those for whatever reason, we might look at homeopathic remedies specifically for detoxification. Excuse me. And then we have to think about lifestyle issues. So our kids are just not usually great sleepers. So we really need to work on that, because lack of sleep equals more stress, which equals more oxidative stress. We have to think about EMFs as well. So electromagnetic frequencies. Think about exposure to screens and electronics. Think about Wi-Fi, things like that. I always consistently tell parents, if you're able to turn your Wi-Fi off at night, don't let a phone or an iPad charge near the head of the bed. It should be across the room for sure. And just, screens are fun and they're needed sometimes, but kids should not be carrying a screen and looking at a screen consistently throughout the day. It definitely changes the way your neurotransmitters work, and it makes a culture of kids who can't just sit still and pay attention when they're scrolling, from one video to the next quickly. So EMFs are definitely a consideration. And then toxin load. So we need to make sure that the child does not have a high level of environmental toxins, pesticides, herbicides, plastics, petroleum derivatives. Those are all things that we can test via urine. Mold is another big one. So, kids who potentially have a mold exposure, we need to know that. And again, we can test it via urine to know exactly which mold strains that they have been exposed to and how high their levels are. So, knowing all of these things are very critical for me to be able to then prioritize an intervention plan for them. What do we need to do first, second, third? All right. So, we have lots of ways to help you. We have lots of resources as well. So, I do a monthly webinar that has replays that are available. The next one is August 8th. We'll be talking about the gut-brain connection. I also write a blog twice a month, and those are sort of housed at thewhymatters.net. This is where you can go to find replays of former webinars that I've done. We do a monthly newsletter that comes to your email. And then we also have a free Facebook group for moms and dads of kids with complex needs. You can look on Facebook and search The Village at Covenant Wellness. It'll be a nice resource for you as well. And so this is our contact information. We are always taking new patients, complex kids, chiropractic, pediatrics. So I hope that giving you a little insight into oxidative stress sort of helps you see the big picture of why your child might be struggling and how we can help them. So yeah, that's oxidative stress on a Friday morning. So any questions, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A section on your sidebar. I'm happy to answer anything, whether it's oxidative stress or something else. I'm happy to answer those questions. If you don't have any questions, I will let you get on with your day. Because you registered for this webinar, you have access to the replay. It's generally available, 2 or 3 hours after the live event. And then you can also watch it on the Why Matters anytime. You can watch any of them. I've got, a couple years worth of monthly webinars about a variety of topics that are specific to complex kids. So if you have questions that you think of after, you can always email me, Dr. Sonia at covenantwellness.net. You can call and talk to my staff at the front desk. You can look at our website. You can also look at thewhymatters.net where I keep the webinar replays and the blogs as well. So, all right, looks like we don't have any questions. I hope to see you next month at our August Gut-Brain Connection webinar. Be watching for our newsletter, be watching social media. We're all the time talking about topics like this. So if it interests you, we have lots of ways for you to learn. All right, thank you so much for your time. You guys have a great weekend, and I will see you in August. Thanks a lot.